The billionaire never begged anyone until she made him fall to his knees with a single word. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. She stared at the eviction notice until the words blurred together, but the red stamp remained crystal clear. Delaney Shaw pressed her fingertips against her temples, feeling the familiar pulse of a tension headache building behind her eyes. The fluorescent light above her kitchen table buzzed like an angry wasp, casting harsh shadows across the stack of overdue bills that had become her daily companion. Rent, utilities, student loans, credit cards, each envelope a small defeat, each number a reminder of how far she'd fallen. 6 months ago, she'd been Dr. Delaney Shaw, respected psychologist with her own practice in downtown Portland. Patients trusted her. Colleagues respected her. She had a corner office with plants that actually stayed alive, and a waiting room filled with people who needed her expertise in anxiety disorders and behavioral therapy. Now she was just Delaney, unemployed, and 3 weeks away from sleeping in her Honda Civic. The lawsuit had come out of nowhere. A former patient's family, grieving and desperate for someone to blame, had accused her of malpractice. Even though she was eventually cleared, the legal fees had drained her savings, and the negative publicity had scared away her remaining clients. Her malpractice insurance company had dropped her. Her landlord had raised the rent. One by one, the dominoes had fallen until she was sitting here at 11:47 p.m., eating store-brand cereal for dinner, and wondering when exactly her life had derailed. Her phone buzzed against the table, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. Debt collector, probably. She'd stopped answering those calls weeks ago, but something made her pick up. Dr. Shaw? The voice was crisp, professional, with the kind of polish that came from expensive education and even more expensive suits. This is Delaney. She didn't bother with the title anymore. My name is Waverly Sinclair. I represent a private client who requires your specific expertise. Are you available for immediate consultation? Delaney almost laughed. I'm not currently practicing. We're aware of your situation. This would be a private arrangement. Off the books. 6-month contract, residential therapy, specialized behavioral consultation. The woman paused. The compensation is substantial. How substantial? $200,000. Half up front, half upon completion. Delaney's hand tightened around the phone. $200,000. Enough to pay her debts, restart her practice, maybe even save enough for a security deposit on a decent apartment. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? Complete confidentiality. You would live on site during the treatment period. The client values his privacy above all else. No phones, no outside contact during sessions, no disclosure of identity or location. And the patient? High-functioning individual with chronic insomnia, anxiety management issues, and resistance to traditional therapeutic methods. He's challenging. Delaney looked around her tiny studio apartment. The water stain on the ceiling had grown since yesterday. Her neighbor's TV was playing some late-night infomercial at full volume. Through the thin walls, she could hear a couple arguing in rapid-fire Spanish about money they didn't have. Where? I'll send a car tomorrow at 9 a.m. You'll have 1 hour to review the contract and decide. If you decline, you'll be compensated for your time and returned home immediately. The line went dead. Delaney stared at her phone, then at the eviction notice, then back at her phone. In her professional training, they'd warned about clients who demanded secrecy, about arrangements that seemed too lucrative to be legitimate. Red flags were practically waving in her face. But red flags didn't pay rent. She walked to her bathroom mirror and studied her reflection. Dark circles under green eyes that had once been described as kind but penetrating by a former supervisor. Auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun because she'd run out of the good shampoo 2 weeks ago. Skin pale from too many sleepless nights and too much stress. What would you tell a patient in this situation? She asked her reflection. Trust your instincts. Set boundaries. Don't make decisions from a place of desperation. But her instincts were clouded by the very real possibility of homelessness, and boundaries were a luxury she could no longer afford. As for desperation, well, that ship had sailed the moment she'd counted out quarters to buy ramen noodles. She pulled out her laptop and spent the next hour researching Waverly Sinclair. Nothing. The phone number traced back to a corporate law firm that specialized in high-net-worth clients and NDAs. legitimate, but deliberately opaque. At 2 a.m., she finally closed the laptop and crawled into bed, her mind spinning with possibilities. Maybe it was a tech billionaire with social anxiety. Maybe it was a celebrity having a nervous breakdown. Maybe it was just another rich man who thought money could buy him a therapist who wouldn't challenge him. Or maybe it was exactly what she needed, a chance to remember why she'd become a psychologist in the first place. She dreamed of eviction notices that turned into $100 bills, of offices with windows that actually opened, of patients who looked at her like she had answers instead of like she was just another person pretending to have her life together. When she woke up 6 hours later, sunlight was streaming through her blinds, and for the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope. She was going to take the job. After all, what was the worst that could happen? At 31, Delaney Shaw thought she'd hit rock bottom. But sometimes the only way forward is through doors you never imagined opening. The black Mercedes arrived at exactly 9 a.m., as silent as death and twice as intimidating. Delaney watched from her window as the sleek vehicle pulled up to her building, its tinted windows reflecting nothing but her own anxious face. She'd been ready for an hour, sitting on her lumpy couch with a small overnight bag at her feet, second-guessing every decision that had led to this moment. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Outside. Take your time. Through the glass, she could see the driver, a woman in a crisp charcoal suit with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. She looked like she'd stepped out of a high-end legal drama, the kind of person who made million-dollar decisions before breakfast and never doubted herself. This was it. Last chance to pretend she had other options. Delaney grabbed her bag and headed downstairs, her sneakers squeaking against the worn linoleum of her building's hallway. Mrs. Henderson from 2B peeked out through her chain-locked door, probably wondering if Delaney was finally getting evicted or arrested. Maybe both. The Mercedes passenger door opened with a whisper-soft click. Dr. Shaw. The woman's voice matched her appearance. Controlled, expensive, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to check her bank balance. I'm Waverly Sinclair. Please get in. The interior of the car smelled like leather and something subtly floral. Jasmine, maybe. Delaney sank into seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent and tried not to feel like she was being kidnapped by someone with excellent taste. Comfortable? Waverly asked, pulling away from the curb with practiced ease. It's nice. Delaney fumbled with the seatbelt, which seemed unnecessarily complicated. Where exactly are we going? About 2 hours north, into the mountains. Waverly glanced at her through the rearview mirror. I have the contract here for your review. Take your time. A manila folder appeared on the seat beside her, thick with legal documents that made her head spin just looking at them. Delaney opened it carefully, as if it might explode. The first page was a non-disclosure agreement that basically threatened her with financial ruin if she breathed a word about anything she saw, heard, or experienced during the next 6 months. The second page outlined her responsibilities: provide therapeutic services to one client, live on site during the contract period, maintain absolute discretion. The third page made her stomach flip: a direct deposit authorization for $100,000 effective immediately upon signature. This is real money, she whispered, more to herself than to Waverly. Very real. My client doesn't make jokes about payment. And he's... What? A recluse? Someone famous? Waverly's laugh was dry as champagne. He's someone who values his privacy and has the resources to ensure it. That's all you need to know for now. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, leaving the city behind and climbing into pine-covered hills that looked like something from a nature documentary. The road grew narrower, more winding, until Delaney began to wonder if they were driving off the edge of the known world. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Why me? I mean, there are hundreds of therapists in Portland alone, most of them currently employed. Waverly's eyes met hers in the mirror again. You have a specific skill set: anxiety disorders, behavioral modification, and a reputation for not giving up on difficult patients. Plus, your recent situation makes you particularly motivated. Heat flushed Delaney's cheeks. So they knew about the lawsuit, the lost practice, the eviction notice. Of course they did. They probably knew what she'd eaten for breakfast. I'm not desperate, she said, though they both knew it was a lie. No, Waverly agreed. You're resourceful. There's a difference. The road curved sharply, and suddenly they were passing through massive iron gates that looked like they could stop a tank. Security cameras tracked their movement with mechanical precision. Pine trees stretched endlessly on both sides, creating a green tunnel that seemed to close behind them as they drove deeper into whatever this place was. "One more thing," Waverly said as they approached what looked like a checkpoint. "My client has very specific preferences when it comes to interaction. He doesn't appreciate small talk, emotional displays, or therapeutic platitudes. He responds to directness, competence, and challenge." Challenge? He's used to people telling him what he wants to hear. It's made him skeptical of genuine help. She slowed the car as a uniformed guard approached the driver's side window. "Don't try to manage him, Dr. Shaw. He can smell manipulation from miles away." The guard, young, serious, with the kind of posture that screamed military training, bent to examine Waverly's credentials. He glanced at Delaney with curious but professional eyes before waving them through. "How many people work here?" Delaney asked. "Enough. Security, maintenance, household staff. They're all vetted, well-paid, and extremely discreet." The car began climbing again, following a road that seemed carved directly into the mountainside. "You won't see most of them unless there's a problem." Through the trees, Delaney caught her first glimpse of the house. Calling it a house was like calling the Pacific Ocean a pond. Glass and stone and steel stretched across a natural clearing, all clean lines and impossible angles that somehow looked both futuristic and timeless. It was the kind of place that appeared in architectural magazines and billionaire lifestyle articles, the kind of place where normal people like her weren't supposed to exist. "He built this himself," Waverly said, noticing her stare. "Every detail personally approved. It took 4 years to complete." "What does he do? For work, I mean." "He innovates, creates, builds things that didn't exist before he imagined them." Waverly pulled into a circular driveway that could have doubled as a small parking lot. "He's very good at it." The car stopped in front of massive double doors that looked like they belonged on a museum. Delaney's hands were shaking slightly as she gathered her bag and the contract, though she couldn't tell if it was nerves or excitement or sheer terror. "Dr. Shaw," Waverly's voice was gentler now, almost maternal. "He's not a monster. He's just protected. The world has given him reasons to be." Delaney nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Rich men who hid in mountain fortresses and paid therapists 6-figure salaries didn't get that way by being soft. But as she stepped out of the car and looked up at the soaring glass facade of what would be her home for the next 6 months, she felt that same flicker of hope she'd experienced the night before. Maybe this was exactly where she was supposed to be. Sometimes the road to healing leads through doors you never knew existed. He was nothing like she'd imagined, and everything she'd feared. Dominic Huxley stood with his back to her in the center of what could only be described as a throne room, disguised as a living space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of endless forest, while the man himself remained perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back like a general surveying a battlefield he'd already won. Delaney had been led through hallways that felt more like art galleries, past rooms that looked like they'd never been lived in, until finally arriving at this space that somehow managed to be both breathtaking and coldly impersonal. Waverly had disappeared with a whispered good luck, leaving her alone with her overnight bag and a contract she still wasn't sure she should sign. "Dr. Shaw," his voice carried the same authority as his posture, measured, controlled, with an edge that suggested he wasn't used to being kept waiting. He turned slowly, and she got her first full look at the man who'd summoned her to this mountain fortress. Dark hair, silver at the temples, tall, lean, with the kind of sharp-featured face that photographed well in business magazines. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold, gray as storm clouds and just as unpredictable. They assessed her with the clinical precision of someone accustomed to evaluating assets and finding most of them wanting. "Mr. Huxley," she replied, setting down her bag and meeting his gaze directly. "Rule 1 of dealing with powerful men: never look away first." "You're younger than I expected." It wasn't a compliment. "You're ruder than I hoped." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and for a moment the room went dead silent. Dominic's eyebrows rose fractionally, and she braced herself for the kind of explosive reaction she'd seen from high-powered executives who weren't used to being challenged. Instead, he smiled. Not warmly. Nothing about this man seemed warm, but with what might have been genuine amusement. "Waverly said you were direct. Waverly said you were challenging." Delaney straightened her shoulders, drawing on every ounce of professional confidence she'd ever possessed. "I suppose we're both getting what we paid for." He gestured to a seating area that probably cost more than most people's cars. Sleek leather chairs arranged around a glass table that looked like it could double as modern art. "Shall we begin?" "With what? You haven't told me why I'm here." I thought that was obvious. He settled into his chair with the fluid grace of someone who'd never doubted his right to take up space in any room. I need a therapist. You need money. Simple transaction. Therapy isn't a transaction, Mr. Huxley, it's a relationship. I don't do relationships, Dr. Shaw. I do contracts, outcomes, and measurable results. His fingers drummed once against the chair's armrest, the first sign of impatience she'd seen from him. My board of directors has informed me that my management style has become counterproductive. Apparently, I need to develop better emotional intelligence before I drive away every competent person in my company. Delaney studied his face, looking for cracks in the polished facade. And you agreed to this because losing my senior staff would cost me more than paying you. He leaned back, completely at ease with his own calculated honesty. I don't believe in therapy, Dr. Shaw. I don't believe that talking about feelings accomplishes anything meaningful, but I do believe in data, and the data suggests that my current approach is unsustainable. What kind of company do you run? Neurotechnology. We develop brain-computer interfaces, cognitive enhancement systems, artificial neural networks. His gray eyes sharpened with the first genuine interest she'd seen from him. We're essentially building the future of human consciousness, and you're having trouble connecting with people. I'm having trouble pretending their limitations matter. The words were delivered without malice, as if he were stating a simple fact about gravity or thermodynamics. Most people think slowly, act emotionally, and make decisions based on irrelevant social considerations. I find it exhausting. Delaney felt a familiar stirring, the same mixture of fascination and challenge she'd experienced with her most difficult patients. This wasn't just arrogance talking, though there was plenty of that. This was someone who'd built walls so high and thick that he'd forgotten there was a world beyond them. When did you last sleep through the night? She asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. His fingers stopped drumming. Excuse me? Sleep. Full night? No interruptions, no work, no racing thoughts. When? I don't see how that's relevant to. When, Mr. Huxley? A long pause. Outside, wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like distant ocean waves. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its careful control. I don't remember. The insomnia started before the work problems, didn't it? Before the staff issues. Before whatever crisis brought me here. Delaney leaned forward slightly, her training taking over. You can't turn off your mind. 3 a.m., 4 a.m. lying there thinking about projects and problems and people who disappoint you. Sound familiar? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Waverly mentioned you specialized in anxiety disorders. I specialize in people who think their minds are their enemies. She sat back, giving him space to process. The question is whether you actually want help or whether you just want someone to tell your board of directors that you tried. I don't need help, Dr. Shaw. I need results. Same thing. No. He stood abruptly, moving to the windows with restless energy. Help implies weakness. Results imply progress. And what if the result you need requires admitting weakness? The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Dominic stood silhouetted against the forest, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. I don't believe in therapy. I don't believe that sharing feelings with a stranger will accomplish anything meaningful. He turned back to face her. But I'm here, and so are you. So I suppose we'll find out together whether I'm right. Delaney felt the contract in her pocket, still unsigned, still an escape route if she wanted it. But looking at this complicated, brilliant, isolated man in his glass tower, she realized she didn't want to escape at all. She wanted to understand what had driven him so far from the world that he'd forgotten how to live in it. For the first time in years, Dominic Huxley met someone who didn't flinch when he showed his edges. The guest wing felt like living inside a minimalist dream that had forgotten to include warmth. Delaney stood in the center of what would be her bedroom for the next 6 months. All clean lines, neutral colors, and furniture that looked like it had never been touched by human hands. The bed was perfectly made with hospital corners. The desk was empty except for a single lamp. Even the closet felt sterile, as if emotions might contaminate the carefully controlled environment. She'd signed the contract 3 hours ago. Through her window, she could see Dominic in what appeared to be a home office, silhouetted against multiple computer screens that painted his face in blue light. It was nearly midnight, and he was still working with the focused intensity of someone trying to outrun his own thoughts. When did you last sleep through the night? I don't remember. His answer had been haunting her since their first session. She'd worked with insomniacs before, but there was something different about the exhaustion she'd glimpsed behind his controlled facade. This wasn't just sleeplessness. It was a mind that had forgotten how to rest. A soft knock interrupted her unpacking. She opened the door to find a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "Dr. Shaw? I'm Iris, the house manager. I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." "It's perfect, thank you." Delaney smiled, grateful for the first genuinely warm interaction she'd had since arriving. "Though I have to ask, does he always work this late?" Iris glanced toward Dominic's office, her expression mixing concern with resignation. "Mr. Huxley doesn't really have a schedule. He works until he can't anymore. Then he sits in his chair and stares at screens until morning." She paused. "We're all hoping you can help with that. How long have you worked for him?" 8 years. Since right after he bought this place." Iris's voice dropped to a near whisper. "He wasn't always like this, you know. Distant, yes. Demanding, absolutely. But there used to be more light in him." "What changed?" Iris shook her head. "That's not my story to tell, but I will say this. He's a good man underneath all that armor, just lost." After Iris left, Delaney found herself standing at her window again, watching Dominic work. The blue glow from his screens never seemed to dim, and his posture remained rigid as a statue. She'd seen this before in high-functioning patients, the belief that motion could substitute for progress, that staying busy could silence the voices that spoke loudest in quiet moments. At 2 a.m. she made a decision that probably violated several therapeutic boundaries. She walked through the darkened house, her bare feet silent on the polished floors, until she reached his office. The door was open, and he sat exactly as she'd seen him hours before, hunched over a keyboard, typing with mechanical precision. "Working late, or starting early?" she said softly. He didn't startle, didn't even look up from his screens. "Both. Neither. Time isn't particularly relevant when you don't sleep. Mind if I join you?" "Why would you want to?" "Professional curiosity." She settled into a leather chair across from his desk without waiting for permission. "I want to understand what keeps you awake." His fingers paused above the keyboard. "You're supposed to be resting. Tomorrow we begin official sessions. Consider this unofficial research." She studied the wall of monitors displaying what looked like brain scans, neural network diagrams, and code she couldn't begin to decipher. "What are you working on?" "A project that's been consuming my attention for the past 18 months. For the first time since she'd arrived, there was something approaching passion in his voice. "We're developing technology that can translate thought directly into action. No keyboards, no interfaces, just pure cognitive intent. Mind reading, mind understanding." He swiveled his chair to face her, and she caught a glimpse of the enthusiasm that must have built his empire. Imagine someone with paralysis being able to control their environment just by thinking about it. Or someone with severe depression having their neural patterns adjusted in real time. That sounds incredibly powerful, and incredibly dangerous. The enthusiasm flickered out like a candle in wind. Every breakthrough brings us closer to technology that could fundamentally alter human consciousness. The responsibility of that. He trailed off, rubbing his temples with practiced efficiency. "Is that what keeps you awake? The responsibility?" "Among other things." He turned back to his screens, effectively dismissing the question. Delaney watched him for several minutes, noting the subtle signs of chronic stress, the way he held his shoulders, the unconscious grinding of his jaw, the restless energy that never quite found release. This wasn't just about work pressure. There was grief here, old and deep, carefully buried under layers of intellectual achievement. "Can I tell you something, Mr. Huxley?" "Dominic." The correction came automatically, as if he'd been waiting to drop the formal barrier. "And I suppose you're going to tell me regardless of my answer. I've worked with a lot of brilliant people, scientists, artists, entrepreneurs, people who carry the weight of their own potential like a physical burden." She kept her voice gentle, non-threatening. "And you know what they all have in common? Insomnia. They all believe their minds are machines that can be optimized, controlled, perfected. They treat thoughts like problems to be solved instead of experiences to be lived through." Dominic's hands went still on the keyboard. "And your point is, maybe the reason you can't sleep isn't because your mind won't stop working. Maybe it's because you've forgotten how to let it just be." The silence that followed felt different from their earlier confrontations, less defensive, more contemplative. Outside, wind moved through the trees with a sound like breathing. "I have 17 patents," Dominic said finally. "My company employs over 3,000 people. Last year, our technology helped restore movement to 47 individuals with spinal cord injuries. That's impressive. It's measurable, quantifiable, real." He turned to look at her again, and she saw something raw in his expression. Fear, maybe, or exhaustion so deep it had become part of his identity. But I can't remember the last time I felt satisfied by any of it. When did accomplishment stop feeling good? The question hung in the air like smoke. Dominic stared at his screens without seeing them, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words he couldn't quite swallow. I should let you sleep, he said instead of answering. Tomorrow we'll do this properly, with boundaries and protocols and all the professional distance you're probably supposed to maintain. Delaney stood slowly, recognizing a dismissal when she heard one. But as she reached the doorway, she paused. Dominic? Yes? Just because something can't be measured doesn't mean it isn't real. She left him there with his screens and his code and his carefully controlled fortress of solitude, but she carried with her the image of a brilliant man who'd built a prison out of his own achievements. Sometimes the most advanced minds are the ones that have forgotten the simplest truths. 3 weeks in, and Dominic Huxley had perfected the art of therapeutic evasion. Tell me about your childhood, Delaney said during their Tuesday session, sitting across from him in what he'd designated as their official meeting space. A sun-drenched room with comfortable chairs and no computers in sight. Unremarkable, he replied, his standard response to any question that ventured into personal territory. Middle-class family, good schools, no trauma worth analyzing. Everyone has trauma worth analyzing. Not everyone builds a multi-billion-dollar company by dwelling on it. They'd been having variations of this conversation for 21 days straight. Dominic would arrive precisely on time, sit in the same chair, and methodically deflect every attempt she made to dig beneath the surface of his carefully constructed persona. It was like trying to perform surgery on someone wearing armor. But Delaney had noticed things he probably thought he was hiding. The way his left hand trembled almost imperceptibly when she asked about relationships, how he'd unconsciously touched the spot where a wedding ring would sit whenever the subject of family came up. The fact that despite living in a house designed to showcase success, there wasn't a single personal photograph anywhere. Let's try something different today, she said, closing her notepad. I want you to show me around. Around what? Your home. The real parts, not the museum pieces. She stood before he could object. You've been treating our sessions like business meetings. Maybe it's time to remember we're having them in the place where you actually live. Dominic remained seated, his gray eyes calculating. That's not how therapy works. Says who? The therapy manual you've clearly never read? Delaney moved toward the door. Come on. I promise not to analyze your decorating choices out loud. After a moment's hesitation, he followed her into the hallway. They walked in silence past rooms that looked like they belonged in an architectural magazine. Everything perfectly arranged, impeccably clean, and completely devoid of personality. This is where you entertain, she observed, gesturing toward a formal dining room with a table that could seat 12. I don't entertain. Where you would entertain if you did. I don't do hypotheticals, Dr. Shaw. Delaney, she corrected. And everyone does hypotheticals. They're called dreams. They continued through the house, Dominic providing terse explanations of each space. Home theater, never used. Wine cellar, investment purposes only. Library, research materials, no fiction. Everything had a function, a purpose, a clearly defined utility. Nothing existed simply because it brought joy. It wasn't until they reached the kitchen that she saw the first crack in his facade. On the granite counter, almost hidden behind a coffee machine that looked like it belonged on a spaceship, sat a small ceramic mug, hand-painted, slightly lopsided with "World's Best Dad" written in childish blue letters. Dominic froze when he saw her looking at it. That's... He reached for the mug, then pulled his hand back as if it might burn him. That shouldn't be there. It's beautiful, Delaney said softly. How old was the artist? The silence stretched so long she wondered if he'd forgotten how to speak. When he finally answered, his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. 7. She was 7. She. The pronoun hung in the air like a prayer. What's her name? Lily. The word came out broken, barely audible. Her name was Lily. Was. Past tense. Delaney felt her chest tighten with sudden understanding. The sleepless nights, the obsessive work, the fortress of isolation he'd built around himself. This wasn't just about corporate stress or perfectionism. This was about loss so profound it had rewired his entire existence. She made this for you, Delaney said. Not a question, but a gentle statement of fact. Dominic nodded, his composure finally cracking. Father's Day, 3 years ago. She was so proud of it. Kept asking if the paint was dry yet so she could give it to me. His fingers hovered inches from the ceramic surface. I haven't been able to. I mean, Iris keeps moving it to different cupboards, but I always... You keep it where you can see it. I keep it where she put it. He turned away from the counter, his shoulders rigid with the effort of maintaining control. This is why I don't do therapy, Delaney. This is why talking doesn't help. Because it makes the pain real. Because it makes it pointless. The words came out harsh, angry. Lily's gone. Talking about her doesn't bring her back. Feeling better doesn't honor her memory. Moving on feels like betrayal. Delaney studied his profile as he stared out the kitchen window toward the endless forest beyond. 3 years. He'd been carrying this grief alone for 3 years, burying it under work and achievement and the relentless pursuit of problems that could actually be solved. "Where's her mother?" she asked gently. "Caroline left 2 years ago." His voice was matter of fact, but she could hear the careful control it required. "She said living with a ghost was killing her too. She wasn't wrong. So you've been alone with this. Alone is easier." He turned back to face her and she saw raw exhaustion in his eyes. Alone doesn't require explanations or apologies or pretending that tomorrow might be better than today. Is that what you think healing means? Pretending? Healing means forgetting. And I won't forget her. Delaney moved closer to the counter, gently touching the rim of the little mug. What if healing meant remembering her differently? Not with pain, but with love. You don't understand. I understand that you're so afraid of letting go of your grief that you've forgotten how to live with your love. She met his eyes directly. Lily made this for her dad. Not for the shell of a man who punishes himself by working until he can't think straight. For the father who taught her how to paint coffee mugs and probably dozens of other things that made her laugh. Dominic's composure finally shattered. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white, his breathing sharp and uneven. For a moment she thought he might collapse under the weight of 3 years' worth of suppressed emotion. Instead, he picked up the mug with trembling hands. "She painted the handle blue because it was my favorite color," he whispered. "I told her once that blue was the color of possibility, and she said that's what daddies were for, making everything possible." Delaney felt tears prick her own eyes as she watched this powerful, controlled man hold his daughter's gift like it was made of spun glass and starlight. She sounds like she was an amazing little girl. She was everything. He cradled the mug against his chest. "And I couldn't save her." Finally, Delaney thought, the real work begins now. The next morning, Dominic didn't show up for their session. Delaney waited in the sunlit room for 20 minutes before walking through the house to find him. She expected to discover him buried in work again, using the familiar blue glow of his screens to numb the rawness of yesterday's revelation. Instead, she found him sitting on the floor of what had once been a child's bedroom. The room was frozen in time, pink walls with hand-painted butterflies, a twin bed with a quilt covered in unicorns, bookshelves lined with picture books and stuffed animals that looked like they were still waiting for someone to come home and play with them. Dominic sat with his back against the bed, Lily's ceramic mug cradled in his hands like a prayer. "I come here sometimes," he said without looking up, "when the work isn't enough to keep the thoughts quiet." Delaney settled on the carpet beside him, careful not to intrude on the sacred space of his grief. "How often?" "Every night for the first year, then maybe once a week. Now," he shrugged, "when I can't remember her voice anymore." The admission hit her like a physical blow. She'd worked with parents who'd lost children before, knew that the fear of forgetting was often more terrifying than the pain of remembering. "Tell me about her voice," she said softly. She had this laugh that started in her belly and bubbled up like champagne. "Everything was hilarious when you were 7. Dad burning breakfast, the neighbor's cat getting stuck in our mailbox, the way I danced when her favorite song came on the radio." His thumb traced the handle of the mug. "She used to narrate everything she did. Now I'm brushing my teeth. Now I'm picking out socks. Now I'm making Daddy the most beautiful coffee cup in the whole wide world." She sounds like she loved life. She loved everything, especially the things that didn't make sense to grown-ups. He gestured toward a corner where easels held finger paintings that looked like explosions of joy. She painted emotions. That green and purple swirl was excited for ice cream. The red zigzags were mad that bedtime exists. Delaney studied the artwork, seeing not just a child's creativity but a window into how Lily had processed the world. Everything filtered through wonder and translated into color and movement. What happened to her? The question came out gentler than she'd intended, but she needed to understand the full scope of what he was carrying. Dominic was quiet for so long she wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Leukemia. Acute lymphoblastic. The doctor said it was aggressive but treatable, that kids her age had excellent survival rates. He set the mug down carefully on the carpet between them. For 18 months, she fought it like everything else in her life, with absolute determination and way too much joy. She made friends with every nurse, named all her IV poles, turned chemo sessions into tea parties, and you fought alongside her. I tried to fix it. Threw money at the best doctors, the most experimental treatments, flew her to clinics in Germany and Switzerland. I was going to buy her way out of cancer the same way I'd solved every other problem in my life. His laugh was bitter. Caroline kept telling me to just be present, to stop trying to control the uncontrollable and focus on loving her through it. But I couldn't just sit there, because sitting still meant accepting she might not get better, because sitting still felt like giving up. He picked up a stuffed elephant from beside the bed, worn velvet with one ear chewed by anxious love. This is Winston. He was her hospital companion, went through everything with her. After, I couldn't stand to look at him. Caroline packed him away with most of Lily's things, but I kept sneaking him back out. The elephant looked like it had been through a war, which in many ways it had. Delaney could imagine a brave little girl clutching it through procedures and treatments, whispering secrets into its fuzzy ears during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. She was in remission for 6 months, Dominic continued. 6 perfect months when we thought we'd won. She started 2nd grade, made new friends, painted a series called What Healthy Feels Like. All sunshine yellows and sky blues. I actually started believing we'd beaten it, but it came back, harder, faster, and by then her little body was too tired to keep fighting. His voice cracked. At the end she looked at me and said, "Daddy, I think I need to go be with the angels now, but I'll paint you something beautiful from up there, okay?" The silence in the room felt sacred, heavy with love and loss and the kind of pain that reshapes the architecture of a person's soul. Delaney found herself crying for a little girl she'd never met, for the father who'd tried to move heaven and earth to save her, for the mother who'd eventually had to choose between her living husband and her ghost daughter. The night she died, I made her a promise, Dominic said finally. I told her I'd never stop trying to fix the unfixable, that I'd use everything I'd learned watching her fight to help other people win battles she couldn't. The neurotechnology, the research, all of it, it's for her. And the isolation, the sleepless nights, the pushing everyone away, that's for me. He looked directly at her for the first time since she'd entered the room. Because I failed her, Delaney. With all my money and connections and supposedly brilliant mind, I couldn't save the one person who mattered most. So what right do I have to rest? What right do I have to be happy when she's gone? Delaney felt pieces clicking into place. The workaholic tendencies, the resistance to therapy, the way he treated every interaction like a problem to be solved, rather than a connection to be experienced. He wasn't just grieving his daughter, he was punishing himself for surviving her. Dominic, she said carefully, what do you think Lily would say if she saw you now? His composure shattered completely. The elephant fell from his hands as he doubled over. 3 years of suppressed grief finally breaking free and raw, tearing sobs that seemed to come from someplace deeper than his chest. Delaney moved closer, not to comfort him but simply to witness, to hold space for a father's love that had nowhere left to go except inward, where it had been eating him alive one sleepless night at a time. When the storm finally passed, he sat up slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand like a child trying to clean up. Before anyone noticed, he'd been crying. She'd tell me to stop being so silly, he said, his voice hoarse, but somehow lighter. She'd probably paint me a picture called Daddy Needs More Hugs and make me hot chocolate with way too many marshmallows. She sounds like she was very wise, the wisest person I've ever known. He picked up Winston again, holding the worn elephant with infinite tenderness. And she loved me anyway, even when I was too busy trying to save her to remember I was her father first, her fixer second. For the first time in 3 years, Dominic allowed himself to remember his daughter with love instead of guilt. Something shifted after Lily's room. Not dramatically. Dominic didn't suddenly become a different person overnight, but Delaney noticed small changes, tiny cracks of light appearing in the fortress he'd built around himself. He started arriving for sessions 5 minutes early instead of exactly on time. He asked Iris to leave Winston the elephant on his desk instead of hidden in a drawer. Most surprisingly, he began sleeping. Not well and not through the night, but 3 or 4 hours at a stretch instead of his usual restless dozing in front of computer screens. I dreamed about her last week, he said during their Thursday session, 2 weeks after his breakdown in Lily's room. First time in over a year. What was the dream like? She was painting again. But this time, instead of emotions, she was painting memories. Our Saturday morning pancake disasters, the time we built a blanket fort that took up the entire living room, the way she used to fall asleep on my lap during Disney movies. He paused, studying his hands. When I woke up, I wasn't afraid I'd forgotten her voice. I could hear it clearly. Delaney felt warmth spread through her chest. How did that feel? Like maybe remembering doesn't have to hurt so much. They were sitting outside today on a stone terrace that overlooked the forest. It had been Dominic's idea, the first time he'd suggested changing their routine. The mountain air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and golden light filtered through the pine trees like something from a fairy tale. I've been thinking about what you said, he continued, about healing, meaning remembering her differently, with love instead of pain. And I think I've been so afraid of moving forward that I forgot she'd want me to keep living. He picked up a pine cone from the ground, turning it over in his hands. Lily never believed in being stuck. If something didn't work, she'd try something else. If someone was sad, she'd find a way to make them smile. She lived in possibility, not regret. She sounds like she was your teacher, the best one I ever had. His smile was small but genuine, the first real smile Delaney had seen from him. She used to say that growing up meant learning to be happy about little things, not just big ones. A butterfly landing on your hand, finding a perfect rock, the way shadows move on the wall when you're supposed to be napping. When did you stop noticing little things? The question caught him off guard. He set down the pine cone and looked out toward the forest, really seeing it for the first time since she'd arrived. Birds were singing in languages he'd forgotten how to hear. Sunlight was painting patterns on his hands. The air smelled like pine and possibility. I stopped noticing anything that wasn't a problem to be solved, he admitted. Work, numbers, goals, things that had clear outcomes and measurable progress. Everything else felt like distraction. From what? From the fact that I'd failed at the only thing that really mattered. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching clouds move across the sky like slow-motion thoughts. Delaney had learned not to fill every pause with words. Sometimes healing happened in the spaces between conversation, in the moments when people stopped performing and simply existed. I fired my entire board of directors yesterday, Dominic said suddenly. What? Delaney sat up straighter. Why? Because they were right. I had become impossible to work with, but not for the reasons they thought. He stood and moved to the terrace railing, his posture more relaxed than she'd ever seen it. They wanted me to be more emotionally available so I could manipulate people more effectively. Better leadership through strategic vulnerability. Corporate empathy as a productivity tool. And you realized that wasn't what you needed. I realized that wasn't who Lily would want me to be. He turned back to face her. She taught me that feelings aren't tools, they're languages, ways of understanding ourselves and connecting with other people. I'd forgotten how to speak any language but achievement. So what happens now with your company? I'm promoting my head of research to CEO. Brilliant woman, actually cares about the work instead of just the profits. I'll stay on as chief technology officer, focus on the innovation side. His gray eyes held a lightness she hadn't seen before. Turns out you can build amazing things when you're not trying to punish yourself in the process. That's a big change. Long overdue. He moved back to his chair, but instead of sitting rigidly upright as usual, he settled back comfortably. I've been thinking about other changes too. Smaller ones. Like what? Like maybe turning Lily's room into something she'd actually want. A space for creativity and joy instead of a museum to my guilt. Like learning to cook something other than coffee and regret. Like, he hesitated, color rising in his cheeks. Like maybe not spending every evening alone with my screens. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to name. Over the past weeks, their professional relationship had evolved into something more complex, deeper than therapist and patient, but undefined by any traditional boundaries. Dominic, Delaney said carefully, you know that when our contract is up? I know. He met her eyes directly. 6 months. Professional relationship. Ethical boundaries. He paused. But that doesn't change the fact that you're the first person in 3 years who's made me remember what it feels like to be human. Delaney's pulse quickened. She'd been trained to handle transference. The way patients sometimes confused healing with romance projected their recovery onto their therapist. But this felt different, more honest. Less about her role in his healing, and more about the genuine connection that had grown between two people learning to be vulnerable again. You're not my patient anymore, she said finally. Not really. You're someone I care about who happens to be learning how to live with grief instead of hiding from it. So where does that leave us? She looked out at the forest, at the play of light and shadow that Lily would have tried to capture in finger paints and pure joy. A butterfly landed on the railing between them, its wings the exact blue that Dominic had once told his daughter was the color of possibility. I think, she said slowly, it leaves us figuring it out as we go. Like any other two people who are brave enough to see what happens when they stop hiding. The butterfly took flight, disappearing into the golden afternoon light, and for the first time since arriving at this mountain fortress, Delaney felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes healing isn't about fixing what's broken, it's about learning to love what remains. The first time Dominic cooked for her, he nearly burned down the kitchen. I may have overestimated my culinary abilities, he said, waving away smoke from what had once been salmon while the fire alarm screamed its disapproval. Delaney rescued the smoking pan, laughing despite herself. When you said you wanted to learn to cook something other than coffee and regret, I thought you meant starting with toast. I don't do things halfway. He opened windows to clear the smoke, looking sheepishly embarrassed. Lily used to say I approached cooking like a science experiment, all precision and no soul. Smart kid. Delaney examined the charred remains of dinner. How about we order pizza and you can tell me what she would have made instead? They ended up on the living room floor, sharing mediocre pizza from the only place that delivered to his remote fortress. While Dominic described Lily's legendary grilled cheese sandwiches that were shaped like butterflies, and her everything soup that contained whatever vegetables she could find in the refrigerator, she insisted that food should tell stories, he said, pulling a piece of pepperoni off his slice. Regular pancakes were boring, but dinosaur pancakes could stomp around your plate and roar at the syrup. I'm beginning to think she was the wisest person I've never met. She would have liked you. The words came out quietly, almost accidentally. She had a thing for people who weren't afraid to call me on my nonsense. It had been like this for the past 2 weeks. Moments of unexpected intimacy woven between professional conversations and comfortable silences. The boundaries of their relationship had become fluid, shifting between therapist and patient, friend and confidant, something more complicated that neither of them had words for yet. Dominic, Delaney said, setting down her pizza, can I ask you something that might be uncomfortable? You've been doing that for months. Caroline, your wife, do you still love her? The question hung between them like smoke from his kitchen disaster. Dominic set down his own slice and leaned back against the couch, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. I loved the woman I married, he said finally. But grief changed us both. By the time Caroline left, we were strangers living in the same house, mourning the same loss in completely different languages. He paused. She needed to talk about Lily, to share memories and cry together and find ways to honor her life. I needed to fix things, to stay busy, to pretend that if I worked hard enough I could somehow undo what had happened. You were both surviving the only ways you knew how. We were both drowning in different parts of the same ocean. His smile was sad but not bitter. Caroline found someone who could swim alongside her, someone who didn't flinch when she said Lily's name or want to change the subject when she shared a happy memory. Do you resent her for that? I used to. Now I'm just grateful she found a way to keep living. He looked directly at Delaney. She sends me updates sometimes, pictures from the grief support group she leads, articles about childhood cancer research. She never stopped caring about me, even when I made it impossible for her to stay. That must be complicated. Everything about love after loss is complicated. He shifted position, moving slightly closer to her on the floor. But you know what I've learned these past weeks? What? Complicated doesn't mean wrong, it just means human. The living room felt smaller suddenly, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Delaney was acutely aware of every detail. The way the lamplight caught the silver in his dark hair, the fact that he'd rolled up his sleeves while cooking, revealing forearms that belonged to someone who worked with his hands as well as his mind. Delaney, he said, her name soft in his voice. I need to tell you something. Okay. These sessions stopped being about therapy weeks ago. For me, anyway. He reached out tentatively, his fingertips brushing hers. I know this complicates everything. The professional boundaries, the ethics of the situation, the fact that you came here to do a job and not to what? Not to save a broken man who'd forgotten how to feel anything except guilt. She turned her hand over, palm up, letting their fingers intertwine properly. What if I told you I didn't come here to save anyone? What if I told you I came here to save myself? The admission surprised them both. Delaney hadn't planned to be so honest, but something about this evening, the burned dinner, the easy laughter, the way he'd looked when talking about Caroline, had stripped away her own careful defenses. What do you mean? I was drowning too, Dominic. In debt, in professional failure, in the belief that I wasn't good enough to help anyone, including myself. She squeezed his fingers gently. Working with you, watching you learn to live with your grief instead of hiding from it. It reminded me why I became a therapist in the first place. To fix people, to witness people as they fix themselves. She smiled. You didn't need saving. You needed someone who could sit with you in the dark until you remembered where you'd left the light switch. They sat in silence for several minutes, hands linked, both processing the shift from professional relationship to something infinitely more personal and terrifying. So where does this leave us? Dominic asked finally. Honestly, I have no idea. Delaney laughed softly. My training didn't exactly cover what to do when you fall for your patient. Fall for? His eyebrows rose. Heat flooded her cheeks. I mean, that is, I didn't mean to. Delaney. His voice was gentle, amused. I've been falling for you since the day you told me I was ruder than you'd hoped. The only question is whether you're brave enough to fall with me. She looked at this man who'd built walls around his heart so high that it had taken months to find the door, who'd loved his daughter with such fierce devotion that losing her had nearly destroyed him, who was now offering her his hand with the same tentative courage she'd seen him show every time he talked about Lily. I'm terrified, she whispered. Good. He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. So am I. Lily always said the best adventures were the ones that made your stomach feel like butterflies. Outside, wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like distant applause, and Delaney realized she wasn't just falling for Dominic Huxley. She was falling into the life she'd never been brave enough to imagine. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fanfare. It sneaks up quietly, disguised as healing. The crisis call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other. Delaney woke to her phone buzzing insistently against her nightstand. Through her bedroom window, she could see lights blazing in Dominic's office. Never a good sign, especially since he'd been sleeping better lately. Dr. Shaw. The voice belonged to Waverly, but it sounded strained, professional calm, barely masking panic. I need you to come to the main house immediately. There's been a development with Mr. Huxley. Delaney threw on clothes and ran across the property, her bare feet slipping on dew-soaked grass. She found Dominic exactly where she'd expected, hunched over his computer screens but not working. He was staring at an email with the kind of frozen intensity that suggested his world had just shifted off its axis. What happened? She asked softly. Read it. His voice was hollow, distant. He gestured toward the screen without looking away. The email was from a journalist at Tech World magazine. Mr. Huxley, I'm working on a story about the personal lives of tech billionaires and how tragedy shapes innovation. I have sources confirming that your daughter's death from leukemia directly motivated your company's pivot toward medical neurotechnology. I'd like to include Lily's story in my article about how grief drives genius. Please call me to discuss details. Delaney's stomach dropped. How did they find out? I don't know. Dominic's hands were trembling slightly as he scrolled through his inbox. There are 7 more emails just like this one. Different publications, same invasive curiosity about my dead daughter. This is what you were afraid of, isn't it? The real reason you hired me for private sessions instead of going to a traditional therapist. Among other reasons. He finally looked at her, and she saw raw panic in his gray eyes. I can't let them turn her into a news story, Delaney. She deserves better than being reduced to a tragic motivation in someone else's business profile. What do the emails want specifically? Photos? Medical records? Details about her treatment, her final days? Her last words? His voice broke on the last phrase. One of them asked if I kept any of her artwork they could photograph for the piece. Delaney felt fury rise in her chest. Clean, protective, and absolutely certain. They want to monetize your grief. They want to explain why a man who used to develop luxury tech pivoted to medical research. Apparently, dead children make for compelling narrative arcs. Dominic stood abruptly, pacing to the windows. I should have seen this coming. Success makes you visible, visibility makes you vulnerable. So what do? We. He turned back to face her, something shifting in his expression. Delaney, this is about to get ugly. Media attention, invasive questions, photographers camping outside the gates, this isn't your problem. The hell it isn't. She moved closer, catching his hands in hers. You think I'm going to run at the first sign of complications? I think you came here to do a job, not to get dragged through a media circus because some billionaire fell in love with his therapist. The words hung in the air like a confession neither of them had been ready to make. Fell in love. Present tense. Undeniable. Terrifying in its simple truth. Is that what happened? Delaney asked quietly. You fell in love with me? I fell in love with the woman who looked at my worst day and didn't flinch, who made me remember that healing doesn't mean forgetting. His hands tightened around hers. But loving you doesn't give me the right to drag you into this mess. What if I want to be dragged? You don't understand. These people will investigate everyone in my life. They'll dig up your malpractice case, your financial problems, make assumptions about why you took this job. His voice was getting more agitated. They'll paint you as either a gold digger or a predator who took advantage of a grieving man. Let them. Delaney, let them try, she said more firmly. Because anyone who bothers to look deeper will see exactly what this is. Two people who helped each other remember how to be human. Dominic pulled his hands free, running them through his hair in frustrated gestures. You're not thinking clearly. This could destroy your career, your reputation. No one will ever trust you as a therapist again if this gets twisted in the media. My career was already destroyed when I got here, remember? And my reputation is my own to manage. She stepped closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. The only question is whether you trust me enough to face this together, or if you're going to do what you always do when things get complicated. Which is what? Push people away and try to solve everything alone. The accusation hit its mark. Dominic went very still, his jaw working as he processed the familiar pattern she'd identified. This is different, he said finally. This isn't about my control issues or fear of vulnerability. This is about protecting you from something that could genuinely hurt you. And what about protecting us? What we've built here? Delaney gestured toward the space between them, toward the months of trust and healing and careful intimacy they'd cultivated. Are you willing to throw that away because some journalists want to turn your grief into clickbait? I'm trying to be realistic. You're trying to be a martyr. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but she didn't take them back. You're so used to carrying everything alone that you can't imagine someone choosing to stand beside you when things get difficult. That's not. It is exactly that. She moved closer again, close enough to see the exhaustion and fear warring in his expression. Dominic, I'm not Caroline. I'm not going to leave because loving you got complicated. I'm not going to let you sacrifice our relationship on the altar of your noble intentions. Then what do you suggest? We face it together. We control the narrative instead of letting them control it for us. Delaney's mind was already working, drawing on years of crisis management from her clinical training. You want to honor Lily's memory? Then let's make sure any story told about her is told right. You mean go public ourselves? I mean, stop hiding like we have something to be ashamed of. She reached for his hands again, relieved when he didn't pull away. You're not a broken man who seduced his therapist. I'm not a desperate woman who took advantage of a client. We're two people who found each other in the middle of our respective storms and decided to weather them together. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, staring at their joined hands as if trying to decode the future written in the lines of her palms. The media will be relentless, he said finally. Then we'll be relentless back. They'll try to make this about money, about power dynamics, about professional ethics. Then we'll show them what it's really about. Which is? Delaney smiled, feeling certainty settle in her chest like sunlight after a storm. Love, the kind that doesn't run when things get scary. Sometimes the biggest risk isn't falling in love. It's admitting it to a world that wants to tear it apart. The media storm hit with the force of a Category 5 hurricane disguised as journalism. By Thursday morning, there were 12 news vans camped outside Dominic's gates, helicopters circling overhead like mechanical vultures, and paparazzi with telephoto lenses hidden in the surrounding forest. The story had exploded across every platform. Tech billionaire's secret mountain retreat with live-in therapist. The 7-year-old who changed medical history. Love or manipulation. Inside a controversial treatment arrangement. Delaney watched the circus from Dominic's office window, while he fielded angry calls from lawyers, board members, and publicists, who all had very strong opinions about damage control. No comment, he said into his phone for the 15th time that morning. We will not be providing medical records, family photographs, or exclusive interviews about my daughter's illness. But the damage was already spreading. Social media had latched onto the story with terrifying enthusiasm. Dead daughter billionaire was trending on Twitter alongside daughter therapist gold digger and daughter grief grifter. People who had never met them were writing think pieces about professional ethics, power dynamics, and whether love could truly exist between a man with unlimited resources and a woman with mounting debts. "The board is demanding an emergency meeting," Dominic said after ending his latest call. "They want me to issue a public statement distancing the company from my personal life, followed by an immediate leave of absence." "And what did you tell them?" "That they can schedule their meeting for next week, after I've had time to think." He moved to stand beside her at the window. "My new CEO is handling it well. The stock price dropped initially, but it's stabilizing as investors realize this doesn't actually affect our technology or research capabilities." "What about us? How are we handling it?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment, watching a reporter practice her stand-up in front of his gates. "I keep thinking about what you said, about controlling the narrative instead of letting them control it for us. I meant it. I know you did. But Delaney, I need you to understand what that would mean. Going public, telling our story on our terms, it would change everything. There would be no privacy, no quiet moments, no peaceful mornings without someone analyzing every gesture between us." She turned to face him fully. And I'm terrified of losing what we've built here. He gestured toward the space between them, toward the sanctuary they'd created in his mountain fortress. "What we have is real because it grew in private, away from expectations and judgment. I don't know if it can survive under public scrutiny. So what's the alternative? We hide forever? You go back to being the mysterious recluse and I disappear into witness protection? Maybe, if that's what it takes to protect this." Delaney felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was the moment she'd been dreading since the email started arriving. The moment when Dominic's fear would override his love, when his protective instincts would push her away, just like they'd pushed away everyone else who'd tried to get close. "You're doing it again," she said quietly. "Doing what?" "Choosing to be alone because it feels safer than being vulnerable." She moved away from the window, putting physical distance between them to match the emotional space he was trying to create. "You'd rather sacrifice our relationship than risk having it judged by strangers. I'd rather sacrifice our public relationship than lose you to media vultures who want to tear apart everything genuine between us." "That's the same thing, Dominic." "No, it's not. We could still—" "What? Sneak around? Meet in secret? Build a life together that we're ashamed to acknowledge?" Her voice rose with frustration. "That's not love. That's hiding. Sometimes hiding is survival, and sometimes hiding is cowardice." The words hung between them like a slap. Dominic's face went carefully blank, the expression she recognized from their earliest sessions, the fortress walls slamming back into place. "I see," he said coolly. "So in your professional opinion, I'm a coward. In my personal opinion, you're a man who's so afraid of losing people that you push them away before they can leave on their own. Better than watching them get destroyed by association with me. God, you're exhausting." The words exploded out of her with months of suppressed frustration. "Do you know what it's like to love someone who treats every kindness like a burden? Every connection like a liability? Delaney." "No, I'm talking now." She moved closer, her hands clenched at her sides. "You want to know what I think? I think this media circus terrifies you, but not for the reasons you're claiming. I think you're scared that if the whole world sees our relationship, they might also see that you're worthy of love despite your grief. That maybe, just maybe, you deserve happiness even though Lily's gone. That's enough." "Is it? Because I think we're just getting started." Her voice was steady now, controlled, carrying the weight of every conversation they'd had about healing and vulnerability, and the courage required for both. "You've spent 3 years punishing yourself for surviving your daughter's death, and now that you've finally started to live again, you want to punish yourself for that too. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You'd rather be miserable and alone than risk being happy in public, because happiness feels like betraying Lily's memory." "Stop." The word came out sharp, warning. "What do you think she would say if she could see you now? If she knew you were willing to throw away love because some strangers might have opinions about it?" "I said stop." "She'd tell you to stop being so silly, wouldn't she? She'd paint you a picture called Daddy Needs to Remember How to Be Happy, and make you hot chocolate with way too many marshmallows." "Delaney, please." "She'd want you to live, Dominic. Not just survive, not just exist, but actually live, with messy emotions and public mistakes and love that's complicated and real and worth fighting for." "Enough!" The word exploded from him like a physical force. He was shaking now, his careful control finally shattered. "You think you know what my dead daughter would want? You think you understand what it means to love someone so much that losing them rewrites the basic architecture of your existence?" "No," Delaney said quietly. But I know what it means to love someone so much that you're willing to fight for them, even when they're fighting against you. Dominic stared at her, breathing hard, his gray eyes wild with 3 years' worth of suppressed pain and newly awakened hope warring against each other. And then, for the second time since she'd known him, his composure cracked completely. But this time, instead of collapsing, he fell to his knees. Right there in his office, surrounded by the chaos of a media storm and the wreckage of their first real fight, Dominic Huxley, the man who had never begged anyone for anything, looked up at her with tears streaming down his face. "Please," he whispered, "please don't give up on me. I'm scared and I'm selfish and I don't know how to do this, but I can't lose you too. I can't survive losing you too." Delaney felt her own defenses crumble as she looked down at this brilliant, complicated, impossible man who had finally learned the difference between protecting someone and pushing them away. "Then stop trying to lose me," she said, extending her hand. "Stop making decisions for us and start making them with me." He took her hand like a lifeline, letting her pull him back to his feet. When he was standing again, he didn't let go. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice hoarse but steady. "We tell our story. On our terms, in our words. We show the world what love actually looks like when two broken people decide to heal together. And if they try to tear us apart?" Delaney smiled, feeling stronger than she had in months. "Then they'll learn what happens when they mess with a woman who's finally found something worth fighting for. Some battles are won with strategy, others with surrender. The wisest fighters know the difference." 18 months later, the coffee shop on 5th Street had become their Saturday morning ritual, a deliberately ordinary place where a billionaire neurotechnology innovator and his former therapist could sit like any other couple, arguing over crossword puzzle clues and sharing blueberry muffins that were definitely not made by a 5-star chef. 7 letters, "What healing requires," Delaney read from the newspaper spread between them. "Ends in E. Courage," Dominic answered, without looking up from his laptop where he was reviewing grant applications for the Lily Huxley Foundation, their joint venture that funded innovative childhood cancer research while providing art therapy programs in pediatric hospitals. Too obvious. She tapped her pen against the paper. The Times crossword is never that straightforward. Patience, 8 letters. Honesty, 7, but closer. She glanced around the bustling cafe, smiling at the normalcy of it all. A year and a half ago, this scene would have been impossible. Too public, too risky, too real. Now it was simply Tuesday in their carefully reconstructed life. The media storm had lasted exactly 6 weeks. 6 weeks of invasive questions, unauthorized biographies, and think pieces about power dynamics and professional ethics. But they'd weathered it together, controlling their narrative through a carefully orchestrated interview with 60 Minutes, where they'd spoken honestly about grief, healing, and the unexpected ways love could grow in the spaces between professional boundaries and personal truth. The public response had been mixed but ultimately warmer than expected. Dominic's willingness to speak openly about his daughter, their foundation's tangible impact on pediatric care, and Delaney's articulate defense of unconventional therapeutic approaches had gradually shifted public opinion from skepticism to grudging respect. More importantly, they'd survived the scrutiny with their relationship intact. "Bravery," Dominic said suddenly. "What? 7 letters? Ends in Y. What healing requires?" "Bravery." Delaney counted the letters and smiled. "Perfect." She filled in the answer, then looked up to find him watching her with that expression she'd learned to recognize, part adoration, part amazement that she was still here, still real, still choosing him every day. "What?" she asked. "I was thinking about the interview last week, the journalist who asked what we'd learned from everything that happened. And I said we'd learned that love isn't about avoiding pain. It's about choosing to hurt together when necessary." He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. "But I think I gave an incomplete answer." "How so?" "We also learned that healing isn't a destination. It's a practice. Something you choose every day, sometimes every hour." He reached across the table to touch her hand. "Some days I still wake up and expect the grief to have disappeared overnight, like solving a particularly complex equation. Other days I'm surprised that happiness doesn't feel like betraying Lily's memory. And today I woke up grateful for the work we're doing, for the life we've built, for a woman brave enough to love a complicated man in an even more complicated world." Delaney felt warmth spread through her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced that first day when he'd smiled genuinely for the first time. The foundation announcement is next week. Nervous? Excited. Lily would love knowing that her story is helping other kids get better art supplies in their hospital rooms. They'd decided to expand beyond medical research, adding creative therapy programs that brought professional artists into pediatric wards. It was Dominic's idea, inspired by his daughter's belief that emotions could be painted, shaped, sculpted into something beautiful instead of buried under layers of protective numbness. "She would also love seeing you this happy," Delaney said softly. "I think so too," he smiled. Not the careful, controlled expression from their early sessions, but something open and real and slightly amazed. "Dr. Patterson says grief and joy can coexist. That loving Lily and loving you aren't competing emotions." Dr. Patterson was Dominic's new therapist, a grandfatherly psychiatrist with 40 years of experience helping parents navigate loss. Delaney had insisted on finding him professional support that didn't come with romantic complications, and Dominic had surprised her by agreeing without argument. "Smart man, Dr. Patterson. Smart enough to remind me that healing isn't linear, that some days will still be harder than others, and that's not failure, it's human." A young girl at the next table was coloring in a book, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she carefully stayed within the lines. She couldn't have been more than 6, and something about her fierce dedication to her artistic vision made them both pause. "She's got Lily's focus," Dominic observed, "and her commitment to color choices." The little girl had decided that trees should be purple and clouds should be orange, a decision she was executing with absolute confidence. They watched in comfortable silence as the child worked, neither of them needing to articulate what they were both thinking. That beauty could still catch them off guard, that children still embodied the kind of unself-conscious joy that made the world feel full of possibility. "Delaney," Dominic said quietly, "I have something for you. It's not my birthday. It's not a birthday gift." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "It's an I love you more every day and I can't imagine doing this life with anyone else gift." She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a ceramic ornament painted in brilliant blues and yellows, a butterfly with slightly lopsided wings and "Love you, Daddy," written in childish letters along the bottom. "Lily made this the Christmas before she got sick," Dominic explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd forgotten it existed until I was going through some boxes last week. Caroline had saved it with some other ornaments from that year." "Dominic, I can't take this." "Yes, you can, because she would have loved you, and because you've taught me that sharing her memory doesn't diminish it, it multiplies it." Delaney cradled the delicate ornament in her palms, feeling the weight of trust and love and carefully healed grief. "It's beautiful. So is this. What we've built together." He reached across the table again, this time to tilt her chin up until she was looking directly at him. "I love you, Dr. Delaney Shaw. I love your stubborn refusal to let me hide from happiness. I love the way you make ordinary mornings feel extraordinary. I love that you stayed when staying got complicated. I love you too, Mr. Dominic Huxley." She smiled through tears she hadn't realized were forming. "I love your terrible cooking and your brilliant mind and the way you honor your daughter by refusing to stop living." The little girl at the next table finished her coloring and held up her masterpiece for her mother's approval. The woman praised her daughter's creative color choices with the kind of enthusiastic support that would probably keep that child believing in her own artistic vision for years to come. "Look," Delaney whispered, nodding toward the scene. "That's what love looks like. Believing in someone's vision even when it doesn't match conventional wisdom. Is that what you did for me? Believed in my vision? I believed in your capacity for joy, even when you'd forgotten it existed." She carefully wrapped Lily's butterfly ornament back in its tissue paper. "And you believed I was worth fighting for, even when I was too scared to fight for myself. Best decision I ever made." They finished their coffee in comfortable quiet, reading the newspaper and watching the Saturday morning crowd flow around them. Parents chasing toddlers, college students hunched over textbooks, elderly couples sharing Danish pastries and 40-year-old jokes. Normal people living normal lives, finding ordinary magic in coffee shops and crossword puzzles, and the simple act of choosing to love each other through whatever complications the world might throw their way. When they finally left, walking hand in hand toward the farmer's market where they'd buy ingredients for another cooking experiment that would probably require takeout backup plans, Delaney realized something that would have surprised her 18 months ago. She wasn't thinking about the past, about malpractice lawsuits or eviction notices or the professional life she'd lost. She wasn't worrying about the future, about media attention or foundation logistics or the million ways loving a public figure could get complicated. She was simply present in this moment, walking beside a man who'd learned to live with his grief instead of hiding from it, grateful for the unexpected ways healing could transform two people brave enough to do the work together. Above them, the October sky was the exact shade of blue that Lily had once declared was the color of possibility. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Delaney believed in the infinite possibility of ordinary love. The end. What does it take to love someone completely? The courage to be seen, the strength to stay present, and the wisdom to know that healing, like love, is not a destination but a daily choice. Would you have the courage to love someone like that? And if love meant choosing vulnerability over safety, would you make the same choice they did? Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.